Hey there, friends. It's a pleasure to be back here with you for another episode. Today, as you've asked, it's time to talk about two people who were very important in the Ocran. Their actions had a lot of reactions, and from the perspective of Sinaloa, I can almost say it was a turning point. Because after these people decided to cooperate with the American justice system, a wave of situations and conflicts began, accusations against many of the most powerful men in Mexico. And even today, though it might not seem like it, there are still repercussions in the Sinaloa organization as a result of the protagonists' actions in this episode. But you'll understand that later. Now I want to introduce you to the brothers Pedro and Margarito Flores. Pedro was nicknamed Peter, and Margarito Jr. They have become very relevant since their actions will also go down in the history of Ocran. So friends, let's learn the story of these two brothers who put the Sinaloa Telcar and several other figures from various organizations in check. First, here's a picture of the brothers. These two are part of the infinite chain of Ocran, which I mentioned in a previous episode, but specifically they are a fundamental part of the Ocran chain, of the Sinaloa Telcard, because so many things happened because of them. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning. All right, to understand the story, let's go back to the beginnings of the Flores brothers. They were born in the city of Chicago and grew up in La Villita, which is a place with lots of Mexicans there in Chicago. Their family comes from the state of Zacatecas. The twins, in my opinion, are among the youngest to enter the business of Ocran, since, like many others, it was an inheritance from their father. Their dad moved merchandise, but in the early 1980s. He was arrested and was in prison for about 7 years. When he got out of jail, he continued working in the same business. By then, the twins were about 7 years old, and that's when they first got involved in the Ocran, because their dad asked them to help him get some weed packages that were hidden in the gas tank. He asked them because obviously they were small and had tiny hands that fit perfectly in the hole. That was their first interaction with this environment. Their father was also their teacher, as he was the one who taught them how to use gram scales to separate merchandise into different amounts. By the time they were 8, they were already serving as interpreters in their father's negotiations. And at 9 years old, they were already crossing the border with large shipments of merchandise. Obviously, they were just the companions and the ones who made the border patrol get distracted. So they would see something funny when watching two small, identical kids with their father. And that was the technique to get them a pass into the United States. That's how they started involuntarily in Ocran. But then, their father fell into prison again. And after he was released, he had to go to Mexico, as he was accused of another charge related to Ocran. The twins' older brother also worked selling merchandise. But as it always happens, he also ended up in jail. Then, the twins, without their father and older brother, had to start looking out for their family, so they decided to join Ocran on their own free will. but completely this time using the connections their dad had in Mexico. The twins' first deal came when they were 17, and they sold 30 kilos of powder. And that's how they were shot into the big leagues, selling here, selling there. Many of the products they sold them to the Latin Kings gang. So at just 18 years old, they had earned their first $1 million. Imagine that, being so young and having that income. It wasn't long before they were going to Culiacan to negotiate merchandise prices. But, as always happens, envy in this business knows no boundaries, and quickly people started talking a lot in Chicago about these twins, everything they were achieving. That's how one day, like any other, they gave Peter a Levantin. He was at the back of where he lived when a patrol car approached him, and then 2 officers got out of the car and went up to him. They ordered him to turn around and immediately handcuffed him, read him his rights, and put him in the patrol car. Once he was in the back, one of the officers got back there with him and tied his feet and put a bag over his head. They drove a few blocks before they parked and moved Peter to the back of another van. After that, they took him to a house and put him in the basement. There, a person started hitting him repeatedly until they got a phone call. Then they tied Peter to a chair and kept him there for over 24 hours without giving him food or water. But this wasn't because he owed a debt or did something wrong. It was just a nap kid, plain and simple. He wasn't the only one to go through this horrible experience. Back then, many people were being targeted in this way. They would kidnap them, and to release them, they would extort them or steal goods and demand money. What's interesting about this case is that there were corrupt police officers from the city of Chicago who were doing the kidnappings. Imagine, kidnappings done by the police. They were doing the dirty work. Unfortunately, it was inevitable that they'd attract attention. They were just young guys and moving millions of dollars. And as they say, there are 2 things you can't hide: love and money. So people noticed that these 2 young guys were moving a lot of money because they were moving things in Chicago. And stories spread by word of mouth. And, well, the twins had 80 or 100 workers just in the city of Chicago. When the kidnappers contacted Margarito, they asked for $500,000 and 100 kilos of blow to release his brother Peter. The man behind this operation was named Raj. And regarding the workers, they all had to always be well-dressed like business people. And no one was allowed to wear flashy jewelry or walk around in caps and sneakers. Everyone had to blend in like any business person going to work. This was so the workers wouldn't raise suspicion. But now, let's see how they operated and what logistics they had in place. Talking about work, as I mentioned, everything was very well organized. Whenever money came into an office, the workers immediately started counting it. As a general rule, they never had more than $7 million in an office. And in those places which were exclusively for money, everything was well equipped with soundproof rooms because they had several counting machines, and those machines make quite a bit of noise when they're working. So the twins' workers quickly counted the money and packed it. And it's because the twins learned everything about organization and productivity from one of their first legal jobs, because they worked at a McDonald's. And there they realized that the system in that place was that each worker should perform only one task to never make a mistake. Because if you make a worker do different tasks, well, it's easier for them to make a mistake. So the twins very cleverly copied the McDonald's system and applied it to the Ocran, like as they started making millions. Like many young people, the twins also started buying flashy things. In their case, jewelry, chains, watches. A single chain they wore could cost $2 million. Just imagine, it was something exorbitant. The jewelry they bought, they even had a Nextel phone embedded with diamonds. But they spent on anything. For example, one time they went to a boxing match where Oscar de la Hoya fought against Mosley in Las Vegas. And the twins invited all their friends and workers. They rented more than 60 rooms at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. And they bought front row tickets for all the days they were in Las Vegas. They went shopping and dined in the best restaurants. And they went to the best clubs only in the VIP section. They spent a fortune. There on their strolls, they could spend millions of dollars without batting an eye. As soon as they arrived in Mexico, they did what any crook would do, bought new identities. Margarito and Peter ceased to exist and became Joel and Omar. Now, they were both fugitives from the U.S. government with official charges against them. In the small town, the twins bought a ranch very close to their dad's house, and they began to remodel it. The land was on top of the highest hill, but don't think they built a little cabin or a small house. No, they built a mansion. They had more than 10 rooms with their palapa, pool, fountains, and a basketball court, because they were big fans of that sport and played every day. They also built a sort of small zoo with ostriches, monkeys, toucans, and other exotic birds, and also tigers. And you can imagine the rest. They had absolutely everything, of course, what no ranch can miss. They built many stables and every week bought a new horse. Only purebred horses, extremely expensive, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm told that just on the food and care of the horses, they spent $30,000 a week. Since they were given special food and vitamins because the horses were extremely expensive, it was something no one in that town had ever seen before, and they were doing the usual things that any American does. They would make love to their women practically in view of the whole town. I say the whole town, but really, it was just that anyone passing by the mountainside could see the twins getting intimate, and this happened more than once. The townspeople knew them as the Cogalones. Tell that was practically just for them. When they went to a restaurant, they would book the whole place. The entire restaurant just for them there in Vallarta. Imagine, even Alejandro Fernandez happened to be at one of their parties, and I'm told he had an absolutely great time. They consumed more than 500 bottles of Cristal champagne. Like I said, they spared no expense when it came to enjoying life.
Al parecer, le informaron que los habían agarrado en la casa del tío Pablo y estaban pidiendo 10 millones de dólares si no los iban a renunciar a todos. Otra vez le sucedía lo mismo a Peter, de nueva cuenta levantado, y exigían dinero por su rescate. Su hermano Margarito estaba como loco. No podía ser posible que una vez más volvieran a pasar por lo mismo. De inmediato se empezó a mover, a hacer llamadas para intentar negociar la liberación de las 3 personas. Y entre todos los conocidos de Margarito había un amigo en especial llamado Tomás Arévalo. Él fue la persona con la que Margarito fue a Culiacán, ya que Tomás Arévalo conocía a muchas personas importantes de Sinaloa.
So Omar made a few calls and immediately arranged a meeting for Margarito with El Mochomo, Alfredo Beltran. The next day, a person named Paco picked up Tomas and Margarito. They went for them in an armored truck and took them to El Mochomo. When they arrived, there were many guards at the place, and one of them checked Margarito. Once he confirmed that he was clean, they let him in and introduced him to El Mochomo. Margarito introduced himself to El Mochomo and said he was Margarito Flores and needed help. Then El Mochomo asked him what he needed, why he wanted that meeting, and Margarito said his brother had been taken and they wanted to rescue him. El Mochomo asked, "Who do you owe?" And Margarito began to explain to him. He told him how much he owed, mentioned the amounts he moved, and explained his work. That's when they realized that merchandise from El Mochomo had been received by the twins. And El Mochomo said, "You know what? I don't want you to use my money to pay for your brother's release." And then Margarito said, "No, sir, don't worry. I don't need money. I've got enough to pay off the ransom. I just needed help to make sure they won't resign my brother." And that's when El Mochomo said, "Well, buddy, it seems you move pretty fast." Then he grabbed his radio, called a few people, and then turned to Margarito saying, "I know where your brother is, and don't worry, I'll make sure he doesn't get resigned. But from now on, you'll work with me." Margarito agreed to what El Mochomo said and asked, "Sir, and what about my Uncle Pablo and also my cousin?" El Mochomo replied, very surprised. "What do you mean?" For about 40 minutes and arrived at the tuna airstrip. There, several of El Pocha's boys were waiting, all dressed in camouflage. With all their gear, they arrived in a Hummer to pick him up, and everyone left in the Hummer and on ATVs to the place called El Cielo, the ranch that El Pocha had up in the mountains. When they got there, El Pocha immediately introduced himself, saying, "Nice to meet you. I'm Joaquin Guzman Loera." And Margarito responded, "It's an honor to meet you, sir. My name is Margarito Flores." And El Pocha asked, "What do you want?" Margarito said, "I came for my brother, sir." And El Pocha said, "You know people who come up here to the mountains often never return because of their actions. I could dismiss you and your brother together." And Margarito said, "Yes, sir, I know, and I know it very well. But I came because I have word, and if I owe something, believe me, I'll pay it, whatever it is." After that, they started chatting, and Margarito began to tell El Pocha about all the deals and businesses the twins had with Uncle Pablo, and indeed there was a debt they owed to Uncle Pablo, which Uncle Pablo owed to the bosses of Sinaloa. Fortunately for Margarito, he had the accounting books where he had noted all the deposits they had made, what he had received, and the payments they had given. And everything was the business they would do, they ate, and the twins returned to Culiacan because Pocha said he would send them to meet his compadre Yoma. So the day after seeing Pocha, the twins met with Yoma, and after that, they also started doing business with other figures. I mean, Arturo Beltran Leyva. The twins were money-making machines and everyone loved them. By the year 2006, their business was at its peak. Every 5 days, they sent them between 400 and 500 kilos. Just in the city of Chicago, they sold 2 tons a month. In fact, there were times when they sold 2 tons in just 10 days. That's how they made all to their pockets approximately. In fact, they also did business with Manuel Fernandez, the animal, and sometimes used his tunnels. Once the merchandise was in the United States, it was like a company similar to Amazon. They shipped to practically all states in the Union. To name a few places where they sent goods and had clients: Washington, Philadelphia, New York, Detroit, Cincinnati, Columbus, Boston, Kansas City, Ohio, Colorado, and obviously their main base was Chicago. And that's why money was raining down from the sky, and hundreds of millions were sent to Mexico every month. There were symbols saying Federal Investigation Agency, and they were all taken inside and kept handcuffed. Minutes later, one of the officers' phone rang, and all that could be heard was him replying, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Of course, yes." And after he hung out, he yelled. To the twins, the women, and the Chinese, who the hell called them, who did they called with, he's extremely upset. And then the officer said to Margarito, "The boss wants to talk to you?" "Who?" asked Margarito. "Boss Arturo Beltran." He asked, "What's going on? What are you involved in? Why are you offering so much money?" And Margarito said, "Because I have to, sir. I have no other choice. I'm not going back to the United States to prison." And Arturo said, "Look, we're going to get you and your brother out, but this won't be easy. What is most important to you?" And Margarito said, "Get our wives out of this mess." "All right," said Arturo. "Don't worry about that. Just keep this phone from now on." After that, they put the twins in an armored Suburban, and all the police officers hunkered down, expecting some aggression. Later, the police decided to go out on the street and began to move around the city to bide time until the U.S. agents arrived to take the twins. While this was happening, Arturo's people called the AFIs and said they wanted to speak with Margarito. So, they handed the phone to Margarito, and the musician said, "We have a lot of people ready to rescue you. Don't worry, we have all the roads leading to Puerto Vallarta Airport secured, so there's no chance you'll get on that plane. So you're not going back to the United States, don't worry. But there is a chance there could be a shootout, and this might not end well. But whatever happens, it's been a pleasure meeting both of you." After that, when they turned into a street, many armed men blocked the path of the AFI's vehicles. And the leader, Cho Men, approached where the twins were and said, "Quats, let's go. It's time to leave." By that time, the AFIs were already subdued when they got into the vehicle. With Chomen, they had to go through a military checkpoint, but when the military saw the massive convoy of well-equipped people, they just let them pass. After that, they arrived at the house where the twins were, there, in Puerto Vallarta. Everyone parked in front of the twins' house. When the door of the first truck opened, Peter got out, followed by his brother. And a crowd of well-equipped people. The most important ones went into the kitchen and settled at the dining table. Among them was Chomen. That's how the twins became one of the most famous and successful informants in that environment. The agents gave the instructions that Peter and his brother had to follow. They would start recording all their conversations, their phone calls, and they had to gather all the information they could about anyone. One night at one of the twins' houses was when they managed to record the Pocha negotiating a merchandise. I'm going to leave the recording here for you to listen to.
Amigo.
¿Qué dice? Oiga, ¿cómo está?
Bien, bien, gusto saludarte. ¿Cómo está tu carnal?
Sí, oiga, todo bien, gusto saludarlo. Oiga, acá además lo estaban molestando para lo del otro día que recogí allá. ¿Usted cree que lo podemos arreglar? ¿Me puede rebajar unos 5 pesos de esos?
¿A cómo tratamos?
Me lo está dando a 55.
Bueno, ¿cuánto es lo que te entregaron?
Me entregaron 20.
¿Cuánto?
20.
Ah, bueno, entonces mañana recojo el dinero, ¿está bien?
They also recorded many more members of the organization like Vicente, Juancho, Germán, and Alfredo Guzman. Here, I'm going to play you a recording of Alfredo Guzman.
Adelante. Ok, usted dice el teléfono del mío, ¿verdad? Ok, aquí lo ven. Listo, es del 333 136 1113. Sí, señor. Ok, y ahorita, ¿cómo le hacemos? Ahorita le voy a decir al sucio que le marque para atrás a este muchacho.
Dígale a ver si le contesta.
Ok, ahorita intento, pues si le marco para atrás. That was Alfredillo in regards to his father wanting to call me. The date is 11/9.
Due to this worsening situation, Alfredo cried a lot that day, very worried since he was just a young man and was asking his dad, his father, for advice. His dad just laughed and said, "Just take care. Nothing will happen." But Alfredo said, "Yeah, like he's up in the mountains, always guarded by 200 people, but I'm here in the city, in airports. Anytime they could grab me and send me to the United States to be locked up for life." In January 2016, as you already know, Navy elements captured Pocha in the city of Los Mochis. As soon as that happened, a few days later, the twins signed the extradition order for one of the most wanted men by American justice. Thanks to the signatures of these two brothers, they managed to extradite Pocha. Now that you know a bit about this story, I want to tell you that I've been trying to do an interview with the twins. As you've seen, I started with that new interview format, like I did with the sombrero people. So, I want to ask you, friends, how would you feel about having these brothers, either one by one or both together? If you'd like that, let me know in the comments so I can put more effort into it and push them a bit more. Also, write down in the comments what question you want me to ask them. Remember, they were very close with Arturo Beltran, with the musician, with the Mochomo, with Alfredo Guzman, with the animal, with Vicente, with Yoma, with Pocha, with Chomen, and many more. These twins are very extravagant. They had a lot of connections with celebrities like Kanye West, Michael Jordan, 50 Cent, and many more. Athletes, singers, artists, a lot of famous people. So if you want to know much more about them and have them tell us themselves, support me. I think I could do several interviews. Tell me how you'd like me to handle them. If you'd like us to talk about anecdotes with 2 or 3 people, and then do another interview with other anecdotes with different people, please write to me and tell me what questions you have for these friends. As you know, I'm here to serve you and support me to keep looking for other people to interview who are active or inactive, but who have been completely inside the Ocran. And folks, we've reached the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to support us and follow us on our social media. You already know that the unique and real narrative of the world of Ocran can only be found here. A hug to all of you and see you in the next episode. Don't miss it.